Skillshop, hosted by State of Washington Tourism, SWT. My name is Matthew Ozuna, and I am the Destination Development Manager at SWT. I'll be introducing today's webinar on messaging to Canadian travelers. Please utilize the chat function in Microsoft Teams to say hello and let us know where you are joining from today. Feel free to share your comments in the chat and use the Q&A feature as well. My colleague, Marissa Petrovich, is helping with the webinar today. Thanks, Marissa. She is the Industry Relations Coordinator at SWT. Marissa and I will do our best to organize and prioritize questions from the audience and bring them to the attention of our guest speakers near the end of the webinar. In case you don't know, the Tourism Skillshop is one of many industry educational programs from State of Washington Tourism. This webinar series will engage with colleagues across the tourism sector and broaden their industry knowledge, skills, and network. Each webinar will highlight a specific issue or skill for tourism professionals to ponder and discuss with industry experts. SWT usually hosts live webinars of the Tourism Skillshop on the third or fourth Thursday of every month from 10 to 11 a.m. Skillshop webinars are free and open to all tourism stakeholders. For Tourism Skillshop and other industry updates, visit the SWT industry website, sign up for the industry update newsletter, and follow SWT on LinkedIn. Tourism stakeholders, I should say, may also follow the SWT Facebook group for further discussion on topics related to the Tourism Skillshop and other industry news, issues, and events. Now, for today's webinar, this webinar in the Tourism Skillshop will examine visitation, sentiment, and messaging associated with Canadian travelers. Given the recent economic and political tension between the two countries, tourism-related entities in the United States should adopt a carefully calibrated messaging strategy. For Canadian travelers, that strikes a balance between reassurance, value, and goodwill. Webinar attendees will learn from a panel of industry leaders as they address stakeholder concerns, interpret the latest research and data, and discuss ways to engage with Washington State's top international market. I will introduce today's guest speakers, starting with Steve Hallis. Steve is the founder and CEO of Blue Room Research. He created Blue Room to help destinations analyze and interpret existing data sources and maximize data-driven decisions. He has more than 20 years of experience working in tourism, hospitality, and market research. Most recently, he served as the Director of Consumer Research at Brand USA and as Director of Research at Travel Portland. Steve holds a MBA from the Mason School of Business at the College of William & Mary and a BA in Mass Communications from Wake Forest University. Steve, thanks for being here today. David Blandford is the CEO of State of Washington Tourism. Previously, as the Senior Vice President of Public Affairs for Visit Seattle, he oversaw public policy, industry advocacy, government relations, crisis communications, and strategic communications. His career began with statewide travel promotion, running press trips through Washington State, and working closely with the State Tourism Office on destination PR programs. David was the previous president of the Puget Sound chapter of Public Relations Society of America and served on the board of directors of the Society of American Travel Writers. Dave, it's always good to see you in the Tourism Skillshop. Dylan Dean Boyle is the president and CEO of Visit Bellingham. Before assuming the leadership role in Western Washington, Dylan led the Whitefish Convention and Visitors Bureau in Western Montana. He served on numerous travel and tourism-related boards and committees while in the Flathead Valley, including those focused on sustainable destination development. Great job, Dylan. I appreciate that, and currently serves on several tourism-related boards and committees in the Bellingham area. Dylan holds a bachelor's degree in marketing from the University of Colorado Boulder and a master's degree in parks, tourism, and recreation from the University of Montana. Dylan, good to see you. I'm just down the road from you in Skagit County working with Kristen down here on some rural tourism projects. Donna Malvik is the executive director of the International Selkirk Loop, North America's only multinational scenic byway. She is a seasoned communication strategist with a background in tourism, marketing, and rural business development. A proud U.S. Navy veteran and longtime resident of the cross-border Selkirk region, Donna has held leadership roles with the Kalispel tribe of Indians in marketing and public relations, or public affairs, I should say. She is passionate about supporting communities through regional storytelling and cross-border collaboration. Donna, good to see you again. And I worked with you my first year on the job in the Rural Tourism Support Program. And that's the program that I'm here in Skagit County working with tourism stakeholders in this neck of the woods. So good to see you this many years later and in a different role with Scenic Byways. So glad to talk to you in a little bit, but our first speaker will be Steve. Steve, I understand you have some research and data for us.
I do. Thanks, Matthew, and good morning to everybody. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Hopefully this will work out all right. All right, can everyone see that?
Yes, you look good.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And I think Matthew made me draw a little bit of the short straw this morning because I'm delivering some data, all of which isn't great, but there are some bright spots and silver linings. And so we're going to talk through all of that here this morning. So first things first, let's rip the Band-Aid and get some of the bad news out of the way. This is Canadian residents returning from travel to the US by automobile, shown in two different charts. And what I'd like you to read out first is the font in red at the top of the slide here, and noting that air trips from Canadians to the USA account for about 19% of all resident trips in 2024, which means on the other side of that coin, almost 80% are by land or by auto. So this really is the lion's share of travel between the US and Canada. And as you can see, the chart on the left there is excursionist, which is same day travel, so to and from Canada to the US back in the same day. And then moving over to the right is overnight tourist. And unsurprisingly, both have really fallen off a cliff since January. Hopefully, we've seen this start to bottom out and start to plateau. But obviously, you know, when you're down 30 and 40% on either the excursionists or the overnight tourists, pretty significant declines in the auto travel space. And unfortunately for the state of Washington.
Hey, Steve, sorry to interject. We're having, looks like some people can see your slides and some cannot. I wonder why that is. I was just about to share my screen, but Amy, so a few people can. So maybe it's just a few other folks that are having issues with the screen. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead and with your presentation. I think we're
no
good.
problem. I'm happy to change it up if that would make sense, but I'll keep going if that's the way. Yeah, looking at this, and unfortunately for Washington, even more bad news. When you look at where people are actually crossing the border over automobile, two of the largest declines are seen in British Columbia, which is off 5 there in British Columbia over to Washington. And so if you look at the navy bar to the left, you know, total visitation down by auto within May, specifically down about 40%. And if you look at the Douglas and Pacific Highway BC crossings, down 50% plus. So very, very significant drops in auto travel. And again, probably not too surprising to anyone on this call. Switching gears a little bit and looking at that other side of the coin, if you're looking at air travel, again, you see a lot of routes being trimmed back. And the nice thing I would like you to add here is you're not seeing routes cut between Seattle and Portland yet, so kind of the gateways to the Pacific Northwest. So not to say that won't happen, but as of right now, a lot of Dulles flights are being canceled kind of across carriers. But if you look at the percentages, it's down by 4.4%. It's down by 1.6 to 3.5%. So although they're cutting frequency and cutting capacity, it's not drastic yet. And fingers crossed that doesn't happen. It's also happening on the other side of the border with Canadian airlines responding with the same because they're seeing a decline in demand from the US. And so if you look at flight capacities and frequency from Air Canada, WestJet, Porter, et cetera. They're also cutting service, but again, not seeing Seattle showing up in this data yet, not seeing Portland showing up in this data yet, which is kind of relatively good news. So to go over this all very, very quickly, none of this was probably surprising to anyone on this call. I couldn't think of a better or more articulate way to word the first statement, but international inbound is down, and it's going to be. I think we all know that. I think we all realize that. So, I don't think we need to skirt around the issue. The good news, if there is some here, though, is Canadian visitation is not going to go to zero. There's too much going on across our borders, whether it's visiting friends and family, business, Canadians own properties in the United States. Some cross-border travel has to occur. It's never going to go to zero, and it's likely plateauing, and you're starting to see that curve in the data. And I think in the next few months, we really will see things bottom out and then hopefully return to a little bit of a positive growth factor. I actually worked at Brain USA during Trump's first administration, and that's exactly what we saw. So a real quick drop and steep drop from all international markets, things plateaued and then slowly built back to a more reasonable level. The other thing I'd like to mention is there's a lot of consumer research and consumer sentiment surveys going on right now, and I'd like to kind of frame that and how you should think about this, in my opinion. Consumer sentiment, specifically in the travel industry, is typically a very good predictor of directionality and a poor predictor of magnitude. And what I mean by that is if you interview a bunch of Canadians and ask them, are they going to travel to the United States? Or if you interview people about their spending patterns in mass, they're generally very good predictors of directionality. If most Americans say they're going to spend less or more, that's typically what happens. If Canadians say they're going to visit the US less or more, that typically happens in mass as well. What they're very bad at is stating magnitude. And so if 50% of Canadians say they're not going to visit the US, it almost never ends up being 50% over the course of time. And if you think about it, it's very easy to take a stand for a short while and operate on principle for a short while, and then things start to fall through the cracks. And if you think about it from a vacationing standpoint, if you're a family that lives in British Columbia and you go to Leavenworth every year to take that family picture at Christmas and the kids are whining and wanting to go to Leavenworth, chances are at some point you're going to crack and take that trip. And so over time, you see people kind of reverse the behavior that they were stating initially. Also, another little bit of a bright spot, the dollar has been relatively strong for a long, long time, and it's beginning to weaken. As we all probably know, Canadians are very sensitive to dollar fluctuations, and so it's a bit of a bright spot. So trying to answer the million-dollar question with regards to international inbound visitation, and specifically Canadian, is the sky falling? And I would say no. And here's why. Uncertainty is kind of the buzzword of 2025. I think it was unprecedented during the COVID years. We heard that on every newscast and every article, and now it's uncertainty. And it rings true, right? There's so much going on in the world right now, and it's a bunch of stops and starts, and there's no clear path on where these things are going. And if you look at tariffs, we have a trade deal, we don't have a trade deal, the trade courts are involved. Who really knows where that's going to end up, right? We have multiple conflicts on around the world, whether it's Ukraine and Russia. We have Israel, Iran, potentially. The United States may be involved there. Too soon to really understand. The stock market dropped about 20%, and we're nickels from an all-time high today in the S&P. So it bounced right back. Consumer sentiment took a huge dive recently, largely related to the stock market. That bounced back in a big way with the last reading from the University of Michigan. International inbound is certainly down, but we show some signs of life in certain markets. And then another one that we've all experienced lately, a lot of issues with DMO funding budgets. As an Oregon resident, lots going on in Oregon right now, as you may be aware. Obviously, Washington facing some challenges, Brand USA at the national level. So a lot of things just uncertain in the world of tourism. And so I think a lot of people feel a little bit more stressed than usual, and that's certainly understandable. So my advice to kind of get through this is several things. First of all, specific to international inbound, focus on directionality, not decimal points. And what I mean by that is it's a fool's errand to figure out or try to figure out exactly how far things are going to drop, because you're never going to know. You're always going to be wrong. I was on a webinar a few weeks ago, and people spent about 20 minutes arguing whether international was be down 11.5 or 11.8%, right? It's really not a fruitful conversation. We all know it's going to be down. Let's use the data we have to try to predict, but let's not waste hours, on something that's not going to be accurate anyway. The comforting thing here to me, and I'll get into this more in a second, is domestic travel, despite all the uncertainty in the world, remains intact. And I have a lot of data to prove that, which I'll walk you through in a second. The last thing finally is, unfortunately, data lag is real. It takes a long time for us to get international inbound numbers from Statistics Canada or NTTO or all of these different bodies. You're never going to have as much data as you want. You're never going to have perfect information. So I always think it's best to work with the hardest, best, most reliable data sets you have, and push on from there. One thing that I don't think the news and the headlines and the tourism industry is focusing on enough is what's going on with American travel to Canada, right? And I won't really read all of these, but these are all the kind of the play-by-play by month, year to date of what's been happening with Americans crossing the border into Canada. And you see in January, U.S. vehicle traffic dropped by 5.3%. February continued on that trend. March, there was a 6.6% drop. April, 10.7, and then May, 8.4. What I think the story here is all of these trips, and it's at the bottom bullet of my slide here, are not lost. They didn't exit the travel pool, and I think the lion's share of these trips got taken, and they were largely shifted from international trips to domestic trips. And so that's what I think is the real bright spot, and people aren't focusing off in the data, is these trips are still likely being taken because that demand for travel is real. And so I think a lot of these are shifting from international trips to domestic trips. And I think it's a real bright spot for the state of Washington, because Washington arguably is a great substitute for a lot of Canada, a lot of the same natural resources, hiking, outdoors, parks, things like that. And so I think a lot of people are shifting trips. The other thing that I'd like to look at, and I was really, really surprised when I pulled this data, is what's actually happening with hotel demand. And I only have a few minutes here, so I picked a couple metrics that I thought kind of rang true, but it's all very similar no matter what metric you look at, whether it's demand, revenue, et cetera. And so moving from left to right, looking at year to date, 24 to 25, in the United States, hotel occupancy was flat. 61% year to date in 24, 61% in 2025. When you look at Oregon, exactly flat as well, 55, 55. When you look at Washington, so everything left or right of the red line there, pardon me, is Washington, you do see a little bit of a decline, but not as much as you might expect given all the headlines about Canadian visitation. So across the state, you're only down about 1 percentage point. If you move over to Metro Puget Sound, again, down about 1 percentage point from 65 to 64. The Peninsula region down a little bit more, about 2 percentage points. Southwest equal, about 2 percentage points. Southeast totally flat, 57 to 57. North Central exactly flat. Northwest a little bit down, about 3 percentage points. And Eastern actually saw an increase. So while things are not great, we're not moving up and to the right like we had been for years. It's not as bad as a lot of people expect. And what really gave me, a good feeling inside was looking at average daily rate. And occupancy tends to be a little bit more volatile than rate. And when rate starts to drop, that's when you really have problems. To me, when hotel rates start dropping in mass, that's the big flashing yellow that we're in trouble. And if you look at the United States, again, a rate actually increased by $3 from 157 to 160. Oregon, you do see a little bit of a decline, but within the state of Washington, it actually moved up slightly, but 142 to 142 without the decimal points attached. Metro Puget Sound exactly flat. Peninsula saw a $3 growth. Southwest saw a $2 growth. Southeast was flat. North Central saw an increase. Northwest saw an increase. Eastern was flat. So again, some bright spots in the data once you actually dig a little bit deeper. Now, I also don't want to be tone deaf. I realize that a lot of the communities on this call are not seeing this. And I'm very interested to hear from Dylan and a few other geographies on this call that aren't seeing this. And I realize it's not equal across the state. Every community has its own challenges. But again, in aggregate, in mass, things aren't as bad as a lot of people feel. So finally, to close and kind of round out, what do we all do about this? Now, I'm a data geek. I'm a data expert. I'm not a marketer. I'm not a public affairs or policy person, but I'm going to give you kind of my take on what DMOs can do. And I don't mean to be cute or trite when I say this, but unfortunately, the hard times playbook is back in play again. And if we look at all the major downturns, whether it be economic, social, black swan type events over the past 20, 25 years. And when I talk about those events, I'm talking about 9/11, I'm talking about the great financial crisis, I'm talking about COVID. I'm talking about the first administration with all their international policies. And then the second one, we see the same travel behavior, largely repetitive. And each of these challenges is a little bit different. There's some subtlety, there's some nuance. I want to acknowledge that. But largely, the playbook is the same in that consumers go back to that same pattern of behavior. And what I mean by that is you see booking windows shortening. That's happened across the country in every geography we work with. There's no doubt about that. Booking windows have shortened. That is something that's going to be here for a while, and I think we all need to get used to that and plan accordingly. Second, short trips are taken more than long trips. So people are shortening that vacation time, maybe spending a little bit less, but they're still taking those trips. Also, closer to home trips become more appealing than far away trips. Kind of the natural segue is more of a drive to type trip than a fly to. Also, domestic trips become more attractive than international trips. I also wanted to note a call out specific to Canada. Canadians do not view America as a monolith. They really understand the difference between political leanings of individual states, and they recognize that Washington, Oregon, California, the entire West Coast of America is blue states, and that should provide a little bit of cushioning to the Washington market. Next, we are seeing some lower income earners kind of rein in their spending a bit, but the wealthy are spending very, very freely. If you look at any survey, any data you can find, luxury travel is up, whether it be hotel, fine dining, business class airfare, all that is up. So the wealthy are still feeling very, very comfortable in spending. And overall, travel demand remains intact. We're still seeing demand net, flat, or up in most destinations across the country. Next, drive-to travel is on the rise. The one caveat I want to put around that is with potential conflict in the East, I would keep an eye on gas prices because those could skyrocket and could expand very quickly. That's something you need to think about. And then next is, I call it the battle for Seattle. And to some degree, Portland. As we all know, whether we like it or not, more than half of the state's population lives in greater Seattle, and more than half of the state of Oregon's population lives in greater Portland. And so if you want to market and fish where the fish are, these are two huge population centers that are doing relatively well economically. They have money, they travel, they're largely drive-to distance from arguably every single place in the state of Washington. These are going to be very, very attractive markets moving forward. It's also going to become very crowded because, again, the playbook that DMOs use is fish closer to home. People are taking drive-to trips more than fly. And so people in the Pacific Northwest are likely to stay more likely in the Pacific Northwest. DMOs know that. This is where I would encourage you to get deep on your second and third tier kind of sleeper markets. What are those other secondary and tertiary markets you can go after aside from greater Seattle, aside from greater Portland, that are going to likely come to your destination? Finally, expect these trends to continue in the short and medium term. There doesn't seem to be any signs that this is going to change drastically, and prepare accordingly. We've all been through this before in some degree or another, and prepare mentally, talk to your staff about it, talk to your stakeholders about it, let them understand that this is the new normal for the short and medium term. And lastly, expect the unexpected. Whether you love or hate the current administration, I think we all know that lots is going to happen that is somewhat unpredictable, yet we can predict that lots is going to happen. So take the unknowns and make them known when you can. So again, I think lots is still going to happen that we don't know exactly about, but we can plan on more things happening down the line. So that's everything for me. Just want to thank you for your time today. And then I think we're going to open up questions at the end and happy to answer them at that time. Thanks so much.
Cool. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I have a few questions on sentiment and where all these Canadian travelers go during this summer peak season, whether it's Europe or if they do actually kind of say one thing at the beginning of the year and then kind of change their minds and book a last minute trip to sunny California or a beach destination, somewhere. But I guess we'll get that data probably at the end of the third quarter or at the end of the year. So yeah, I'll save my questions for you at the end of the webinar. We're moving right along to David Blandford. Dave, are you there?
Here I am. Good morning,
There you
everyone.
are. Yes. Okay, Dave. So, boy, we have a lot to talk about. We'll just have a conversation and we'll keep an eye at the chat to see if other folks kind of chime in with us. But first question to you, what is SWT doing or not doing on the topic of messaging to Canadian travelers?
Yeah, great question. And it's good to have a conversation, especially after Steve speaks, because he is so comprehensive. And I love that he layers in the context and does a little bit of future casting and still finds some silver linings. The other thing, and maybe relative to your question, is that Steve, I think, outlined an arc to travel sentiment and that it changes, it evolves. And we see communication the same way at State of Washington Tourism. And so what we're doing, I think, very strategically is to communicate organically, authentically, the welcome to Canadian travelers. It's always been there. We welcome them still when they're ready. We will welcome them in the future. What we're not doing, I think, is trying to counteract any sentiment they may have now, and certainly not counteract anything political. Just let that lie. We have the opportunity to jump into the fray. We are approached weekly with Canadian travel news, business media wanting us to weigh in, but we see that trap. It's not going to serve us well to enter the lead lines of national stories in a battle between us and the other Washington. That would be a great story for them, but that's not one we want to enter into, and it's not going to help travel to Washington. So we're very cautious about that, but we see the story arc. Right now, there's sensitivity. It could be, as time goes on, irregardless of tariffs and political rhetoric in Washington, D.C., that there is some softening and an opening for us there. So we will watch and communicate strategically.
Yeah, good point, Dave. And even any kind of hint of kind of political, hints of politics in this kind of messaging is a turnoff to smart travelers, no matter whether they're Canadian or folks from the UK or where else. So, that's where I was kind of, I took, I had a critique of the Newsom message that he sent to Canadian travelers, but it kind of it fits into a larger campaign from Canada. California loves Canada. So will any of our kind of messaging kind of look or feel anything like that? I probably not with our Governor Ferguson, even though that the governor of Maine was just in Canada not too long ago, I think just a few days ago on a kind of a trade mission, but also kind of a way to kind of strengthen those tourism bonds between Maine and Quebec and Newfoundland.
Yeah, you bring the question about the California travel campaign of a couple months ago that was issued really pretty early on in the tariff war and right in the heat of battle, I think. And there was some immediate Canadian backlash. I think a provincial minister in British Columbia actually spoke out when he saw the campaign and said, fellow Canadians, don't go. It's important that you don't. And so many of us destinations said, wow, they really are mad. And that's a note to selves here. We want to be careful on how we time our proactive response. That said, we look at what I think is, at least from my standpoint, a pretty successful campaign in Seattle, the Open Arms for Canada campaign, which introduced some deals, significant deals for Canadians, maybe from about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, and I think was somewhat well received. And so that makes us question, does the layering in of deals soften a little bit the pain of political rhetoric and tariffs?
Good point. Okay, so when Canadians are ready to travel back to Washington State or the rest of the United States, what does the tone and tenor of that messaging look like, especially from, State of Washington Tourism? And like I said, or like we talked about earlier, how has this changed over the last few months?
Yeah, I think it continues to be welcoming, understanding. They feel the way they do. We get that. They are our neighbors as well as travel consumers. We appreciate them in any way they can come. So that will be the tone. Steve brought up an interesting idea about blue states versus red states and how the left coast is pretty blue, and Canadians know that. And I think he's probably right about that. He would know there is an understanding there. I think that we don't need to say that. I think we will trust that that is indeed true and that they understand there's an underlying political reality here that welcomes them, and that we're not looking to do battle with them in spite of the rhetoric.
True. And just to be clear, State of Washington Tourism has paused its marketing efforts in Canada, correct? And we don't have a dedicated webpage like, New York State or California, a page dedicated to Canadian travelers, welcoming them with new incentives or messaging. So when and how will SWT reconstitute these efforts? Do we know yet? Is it too early to predict?
It's a little early, I think, given the dynamics of the U.S. Canadian political discussions and such. There's another realm too, which is the state of Washington tourism doesn't have the budget that other states have. And so, yes, you're right. We have paused our paid marketing in Canada. It made sense. Many states have, many cities have, many companies have. It just was not the time to invest there. And we certainly didn't want to see any kind of a backlash. So, but there is sort of a double incentive for us with little budget. It didn't make sense to waste money there. When we are able to come back, it'll be determined, I think, by the political situation, the economic situation, but also our budget. And our budget looks pretty lean over the next year. So for the moment, we are waiting and watching. Let's make no mistake about it. Canada is important to us. It's our #1 international market. Most probably always will be. We think of it in our broader North American marketing scheme of things, and always will.
So is this an opportunity then to reallocate resources that would have gone to Canada and advertise in other international markets, maybe Asia or Europe?
I suppose it could be for some destinations. Again, our budget relative to that of other destinations is small. So we don't have the flexibility to pivot like that. And I don't know that one-off marketing ever makes sense. I don't think it's the best return on an investment. You need time in market. You need to be consistent and help mature a market. And I think that's really what we need to focus on. So we'll see, but I think for the time being, we don't have those plans.
Good point. Good point. Okay, last question, Dave. Is this an opportunity to advocate for additional resources, funding, to offset the loss of Canadian business and diversify our target markets?
Yes, never waste a good crisis. This is a crisis. I'm just back from a meeting of other state tourism directors where Canada came up as we would expect it would, and many of them noted that the crisis with Canada, the drop off, as Steve pointed to, has actually helped them to make headway with their elected officials, with public land managers, others who maybe don't always appreciate the size of the Canadian market. And seeing that immediate drop off and seeing week by week, month by month, that very precipitous drop off has helped them realize that demand can't be assumed. There's a need for marketing. You have to keep it going. You have to understand that there are going to be twists and turns, and it doesn't just happen on its own. And so destination marketers are key. Hotels, transportation companies, all essential, all a part of that ecosystem. So yes, is the quick answer to your question. I think that now is a great time to get the attention of stakeholders, and a lot of Steve's data, I think, drives home that opportunity ahead.
That's right. Well, thanks, Mr. Blanford. We will get back to you at the end of the webinar. I'm sure a few folks on this call will have a few questions for you. Okay, we'll start with our next speaker will be Dylan. Dylan, are you ready?
I am ready. I'm just going to share screen.
Excellent. And Dylan, I have your links to your toolkit and your webpage dedicated to Canadian travelers. I'll pop that into the chat as you start your presentation.
Great. And can you see things okay?
I can see them just fine.
Great, thank you. Well, hello everyone, and thanks again for joining us today. I'm excited to walk you through the Canadian messaging toolkit that we developed a few months back for our tourism partners here in Bellingham, Whatcom County, and beyond. It's been said already on this webinar a couple times, but first and foremost is acknowledging that this is a complex time. We know that there are many factors which are involved in the current traveler sentiment for our neighbors to the north, and many of our tourism partners since the beginning of the year have expressed concern about how these factors are impacting Canadian visitation, especially for our area when we share a border with British Columbia, and the larger Vancouver area is one of our top two largest visitor markets. So in today's session, I'm going to talk about how we responded with empathy, clarity, and unity, ensuring that our Canadian neighbors always feel welcome in our community, whether that's now or into the future. So first, I just kind of want to start with why. For us, rather than directly asking our Canadian friends to visit, which we felt could come across as tone deaf, we decided to take a more thoughtful approach, and our toolkit really helps us to acknowledge the current climate while also keeping our messaging warm and welcoming. And for us, it's not about pushing travel, it's about saying we're here when you're ready. And really for us, that simple phrase we think carries a lot of weight. It respects that current hesitation of traveling while keeping the door open to when there is that comfort level once again. So inside the toolkit, which I know Matthew has, we have some sample messaging for our different audiences, social media templates, guidance for working with media, photo assets which are shareable, and then a link to our We Love Canadians landing page, which I'll show you a little bit later here in the slides. So everything is designed to be easy to use and adaptable. First and foremost, our tone really is the foundation for our messaging. We are aiming for warm, friendly, understanding, and welcoming. So we tailor this message a few ways. For those that are currently in Canada, we're here when you're ready, as I mentioned. For those that are already on the ground, it's doubling down on that warm hospitality and making sure that our Canadian neighbors feel welcome in our community. And we also provided a template for how to respond and acknowledge hesitation from those that are prospective travelers from our neighbors to the north. You'll also find, of course, some social media messaging. It's really a powerful tool. And for us, it's something that we rely on for an art of visual storytelling. And actually, one of the most impactful images for us that we use is the peace arch, which has long stood as a symbol of peace and friendship for over 100 years. And it's not only that it's impactful as a symbol, but for us, it really shows that the two communities have always been friends and have relied on each other throughout a long period of time, even when we are going through these kind of complicated times as we are right now. Our hope is that this type of storytelling really resonates deeply, and that the message is not only gentle and supportive, but also taps into that idea of historic solidarity between not only the two countries, but specifically for us between British Columbia and Whatcom County as we share the border. And this is up in Blaine. We also have some interesting sample social media posts here for our US audiences. That is the call to action to support border towns, border communities, because those communities can really use some extra love right now. There's obviously been a lot of media around this topic. I'll share some of those here in a minute. But it's an interesting angle for those that know that those domestic markets, particularly around the US-Canada border, are in need of that extra visitation love, that call to action, particularly for our regional drive markets. So as I mentioned, we have curated a Dropbox of high quality images that our tourism partners can use. That includes some scenic shots of Bellingham and Whatcom County, the Peace Arch, which I mentioned, and our banners from our "We're Here When You're Ready" messaging. And we think that this is a great way, and we've been encouraging our partners to utilize these to visually reinforce that welcoming message and connection. All we ask is that Visit Bellingham is credited when using those assets. We also have extended direction and support if our tourism partners are contacted by local media. We're happy to help in terms of any talking points or anything that's needed, or to help provide extra context and data, because we do know we are still significantly in this media cycle, and so we are certainly here to help with that. And obviously to help navigate those conversations with confidence. Like many of you, we've been hearing from reporters locally, across the nation, internationally for months now. And I did just want to share a few examples of how not only is how this topic is being covered, but how we've articulated our messaging when we've been contacted. So the two that I'm going to show you, these are specifically from outlets in the Lower Mainland in BC, where our We Love Canadian landing page was actually mentioned. Certainly appreciate that. I talked a lot about the history between Whatcom County and British Columbia. And then also in the Vancouver Sun, our City of Bellingham City Council did send a letter of goodwill and support. Interestingly enough, both the mayor of Bellingham and our county executive are both dual citizens. So this is certainly a topic that is near and dear to them. And so they've both certainly spoken on this topic. We also have received national coverage. NBC, again, for us, it was really doubling down on a long and rich friendship, and to let folks know that we will always receive them with a warm welcome, despite where things currently stand. In addition to that, we were actually asked about if we were shifting marketing dollars away from BC. And while we still have paid campaigns in BC, we have shifted some of those dollars into our regional drive markets. We are taking a page from Steve's playbook that he mentioned earlier in that regard. So let's take a quick look at the data. This is what we've seen for aggregate Whatcom County hotel occupancy per month since the beginning of the year. This is year-over-year comparison. So this does include Bellingham as well as all of Whatcom County hotels. So as you can see, our first quarter, we were down significantly. We were down double digits through that first quarter. And we have, again, some two silver linings are that we had significant business travel, domestic business travel in both April and May, which has helped to bring those numbers at least back up similar to where they were last year. With that said, Whatcom County is still down over 7% year to date. That's through May, are the latest numbers I have. Steve mentioned this too, that when you segment out the regions in Washington, we're in the Northwest region, and our region as a whole is down over 5% through May. Our region has still the largest decline that we are seeing across the state of Washington in terms of the Smith travel lodging report. I do want to mention that despite these numbers that you see through the first 5 months of 2025, the average daily rate has actually increased a bit through the year. So we're actually up a little bit, which certainly helps and trends in with what Steve was talking about a little bit earlier. Lastly, for us, we did our best to really keep it simple, and we refer out to our We Love Canadians page as well, which is the landing page that we currently have, which acknowledges all that messaging I mentioned and also provides crossing data as well as what requirements are, and still that idea of starting to plan your trip when you're ready. So to wrap up, this toolkit for us is more than just marketing. It's about really showing our Canadian neighbors that we see them, we value them, and we're here for them when they're ready. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Email there, info@bellingham.org, questions, concerns, ideas. I just want to say thank you for the time today. And of course, happy to answer questions at any point later on.
Thanks, Dylan. Appreciate that. And now I will share my screen and we'll bring Donna on. I hope you can see my screen. I'll go to the very top. And Donna, this is perfect because you reached out to State of Washington Tourism and we put you in contact to Dylan, and you've actually used Dylan's toolkit in your messaging efforts with your stakeholders in BC, Idaho, and Washington. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about all of that?
Yes, well, first of all, I'm really grateful to State of Washington Tourism for connecting me with Dylan and the office over there at Visit Bellingham. Dylan, that was an amazing resource for us. And, I spent a little time looking at it, chatting with our board and kind of developing our own sort of, messaging statements, kind of took your lead, tweaked it a little bit because we are working with 2 states. And of course, we also work with BC. So with that, what we've decided to do with the Selkirk Loop, we honestly don't have access to a lot of data resources, between the 2 counties and the different, and with BC. So I do rely on folks, like Steve and State of Washington Tourism, and I love that kind of data. But what we decided what we could do with the resources that we have is, we listen to our member businesses on both sides of the loop, and, we pay attention to visitor sentiment. And so our strategy right now is really to focus on like tourism with heart. And so that's kind of what we've been shaping ours. Tourism with heart means leading with empathy first and foremost, and then honoring your sense of place here in the state of Washington, being loyal to that, of course, and then just communicating with intention. And so we can go on the next slide. So some of the key findings that the Selkirk Loop has observed is that, again, the Selkirk Loop is a nonprofit organization that serves businesses in Idaho, Washington, and BC. And we've heard from all around the loop, even some of our Canadian neighbors, that that tariffs, higher expenses, higher costs of travel, political rhetoric, all of that has negatively impacted the businesses, primarily with our resorts and our campground businesses. That's who we're hearing the most from. Canadians have their money doesn't go far here. It's so expensive for them to travel here. And so that has definitely been an obstacle for them, and it hasn't gotten any better for them. There's been a lot of stories in the media. I try to keep up with it. There's just so much news in the media. And of course, the Canadian government even recently issued a travel warning for Canadians to come to the US. And they're specifically saying in the media and in those travel warnings that Canadian visitors should expect delays getting across the border. They could experience detainment. And they are specifically saying, expect to have your personal devices searched. And so that is, obviously, when those kinds of negative messages get out and populated, it's very concerning to travelers. We've also noted that some of our Canadian business owners have also indicated that they are seeing a decline in Americans coming to their business. So next slide, please. So recently, the Selkirk Loop did a survey, reached out to its membership and wanted to get some feedback. We also recently issued a press release, and we've sent letters to elected officials on both sides of the border. And so these bullet items here kind of give a general feeling of what we've heard, and there's even some specific quotes in there. Recent survey results indicate just what we've all been talking here, that our member businesses are very concerned about the impact of tariffs and cross-border delays, exchange rates, and they're seeing a sharp decline in reservations. A lot of our hotels, our RV parks, our resorts, a lot of them are very small. They're mom and pop businesses. So I had one business owner, one of our RV resort owners in Washington, hand me a piece of paper and show me his paper calendar that he hand writes in his reservations. And so their ability or access to resources to track data quickly and through sophisticated methods is maybe not what other folks in Washington State are experiencing. So one of our resort owners, our timeshare owners in Blanchard, they said that Canadian owners represent a couple $100,000 worth of annual revenue to them, and they've already experienced some negative feedback from their Canadian owners. They're very concerned about what this is going to look like. Are they going to want to sell? Is this resort going to have a lot of inventory now that they're going to have to resell? And then, of course, I was just talking about that one RV resort owner. I spent 45 minutes with him talking about his concerns about his empty reservations calendar for the month of June, July, August. So, we're hearing directly from our business owners about their concerns that they're experiencing right now and their anticipated concerns for the rest of the season. I do have a couple quotes in here. As I mentioned, we issued a press release and it got picked up by media all around the loop. So we had Northeast Washington, outlets, and North Idaho, and then outlets across BC. I had 3 interviews in one day with some Canadian media companies. And honestly, it was a good experience. So I'll share more about that later. But what they do, with a press release is they will take your press release and then they'll go off and do their own thing. So a couple of the examples that I have here, those last 2 bullet points, indicate where the reporter went out and found their own resources and talked to other people. And so you can see there, this is one quote is from Tom Turpin, CEO of the Kootenay River Inn and Casino in Bonners Ferry, just indicating what a massive impact that they're already experiencing. And, he's concerned about the busiest season for their business, which is the summer season, and they're just not seeing the numbers right now. I am encouraged to hear that booking times are shorter now. So maybe we don't need to panic yet, right? People are just making more last minute decisions than they used to. So that's good. We can go on to the next slide. I know that we're kind of crunched on time. So I would just encourage folks. So I want to talk about this picture here. This is a picture of the mayor in Bonners Ferry helping to raise the Canada flag again in Bonners Ferry. And that was pretty symbolic because this all happened in early May. The state of Idaho had issued some proclamation that, only the state of Idaho and federal flags, you can't have anybody else's flags flying. Bonners Ferry, they did their own thing. They decided they found a loophole that says special occasions you're allowed to raise someone else's flag. So Bonners Ferry said, we're going to make every day a special occasion and fly the Canada flag. And so I just absolutely love that picture. I love that story. And this is just such a great example of a community saying, we live right next to the Canada border. We are very tied to one another, and it's very symbolic to see that flag there. So kudos to Bonners Ferry. So I would just say what makes your destination welcoming to visitors from Canada. So consider your positioning. Are you flying the Canada flag like you used to? Something to think about. We are encouraging our business owners to consider, if not a discount to Canadian customers, think about a value added proposition to customers from Canada, because cash flow is a real thing. Maybe you can't discount your prices anymore, but maybe you can offer something in addition, and free parking, early check-ins, late checkouts, that kind of stuff. I do encourage everyone to avoid political messaging and find good ways to kind of respond. And I'll have an example of that here on one of the slides. And just make sure that your community is, giving off that friendly, neighborly vibe to everyone, and be empathetic to what you're hearing and not argumentative. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so it looks like we only have 3 minutes. So I think maybe, Matt, how do you want to proceed with this? Should we wrap it up, or
if you have 1 or 2 more slides, go ahead. We want to make sure we go right until the end of the hour. And if we can stay on, if we have questions from other folks, we can stay on a little extra.
Okay, I'll bring back my East Coast accent. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so I can talk fast if I need to. So I just wanted to leave everybody with some actionable steps for engaging with visitors from Canada. And again, I really credit Visit Bellingham with kind of kickstarting my brain on this. So definitely, I would say lead with emotion and lead with heart in your messaging. Promote your value-added offers like we just discussed, and be present where Canadians are. I know that we talked a little bit about not advertising in Canada, but that doesn't mean you can't engage, right? You can have conversations and avoid hard selling, avoid politics. And then I think it's really important to coach frontline staff because maybe they're not maybe in at the level, like thinking about, oh my gosh, what's this impact going to have on us? But if we educate our frontline staff and kind of coach them, if they take a phone call, if they get an email, oh my gosh, you're from Canada, it's great to hear from you, just be extra special welcoming that way. And then of course, just, being transparent. So we can go to the next slide real quick. So I have some examples here, kind of what Dylan was leading with, specifics like how would you respond to questions from folks who are calling you, wanting to make a reservation, or maybe they respond to a social media post and they're sharing that they don't feel comfortable for one reason or the other, or it's too expensive, or they're worried about the political situation. So you can read those responses when you guys get this packet later. And then next slide. And this next slide is came the morning that one of the CBC radio aired the interview with me. And so one of their listeners reached out. They found just some miscellaneous Instagram post of ours and messaged us. Well, they didn't message us. They actually posted their concerns, saying that they had heard the interview. And here's an example of how we responded to their concerns. And it was kind of a political leaning message that they shared. And so I think this is just a good example of how we, really appreciate them reaching out and addressing their concerns and having that empathetic ear. And, they didn't argue back. So I guess, that's okay. We can go to the next slide because I know we're at 11. Okay, so I do think it's important, in my opinion, our experience reaching out to our elected officials, our experience reaching out to media actually was pretty good. So even, I don't think the Canadian media that we interviewed with were looking for a fight. I think there's a lot of love there. I think they know exactly who Washington State is, and they see, I know we don't want to say, hey, we're a blue state. They know, you're right. It's been said before. They know who we are. I don't think it's personal. I travel to Canada multiple times a month, and I'm always welcomed well, with a smile on everybody's face. They have still good sentiment with Washington and North Idaho. But here's just some pointers. If you do decide to reach out to media or your elected officials, there's just some bullet points there for your consideration.
Anything else, Donna?
I can't remember if there's another slide. I think that might be it.
Oh, that's
Yep.
Contact Donna with more questions and comments.
Yeah, sorry I had to blow through that. I think
No,
this is great. Good talk.
No, well, I mean, Donna, you kind of hit the nail on the head. I love that kind of training for frontline staff. I mean, you really brought us down to the local level. What, folks on this call, a lot of them in rural parts of the state really have to kind of articulate to all of their stakeholders and frontline staff. So I think that's great. Folks, we did start a little late. Our guest speakers can stay on a little later. So if you folks want to stay on with us, that's fine. I want to get to some of your questions. Marissa, do we have any questions in the chat or the Q&A? Just want to give opportunity to those
We do
folks.
not have any questions in the Q&A right now, and none that I can see in the chat. So
Okay, I'm going to give folks another minute or two to get their questions in. Donna, going back to you, and maybe the rest of the panel can chime in too if they want. You talked about that frontline staff and welcoming, and I'd like to kind of, from what I've heard too, is gratitude to express, like, once they're here, once Canadians come down here, how do you kind of engage with them and kind of get over differences and politics, but also thank them for choosing Washington State? They know us already, but we kind of thank them again. Usually, I assume maybe they might be repeat visitors, but really kind of stressing gratitude on top of kind of a welcoming hospitality, a spirit of hospitality, I think is an important point too. So well done there. I also want to kind of talk about, messaging is one thing, but incentives is another. Once they actually come here, you can say, thank you for being here. What brought you here? Was it actually an incentive? I've kind of seen this across the United States with some discounts to Canadian travelers, some value add, propositions that you kind of mentioned, Donna. We talked about this as a group yesterday before this presentation, and we kind of, we had kind of mixed feelings about that. Dylan, you